Hello and welcome to lesson 2 of week 6. In this lesson, we are going to look at file handling in Python. My name is Mildred. In the last lesson, we looked at how we can use modules in Python. In this lesson, we're going to build upon that and we're going to look at file handling, and then we'll come back in the next lesson to look at how we manage resources, combining both lessons from modules and file handling. We can have a file and we can write to a file, or we can read from a file. Let's create a new file here, and I'll call this file chapter1.txt. I want it to be a text file. So we have this file chapter1.txt, and I want to put content in this file so that we can look at how we can read from a file in Python. Then we're going to look at how we can create a file and write to a file on the fly using Python code. So we have this content in this file, and we want to be able to open this file and we want to read from the file. We're going to see how we do that. I'll create a new file here, and let's call this. For you to open a file in Python, we use the open function like this, and then the name of the file. So you specify both the file path and the file name. Since we are in the same path, I just need to put the name alone, and the name of the file is. So if, assuming you had a directory here, you put the directory name / the name of the file, and just everything we did in understanding programming and software development when we looked at directory structure and how to navigate the file path. So you put the path to the file there, and then you can leave it like this, which will make this file open in read mode, because read mode is a default. If you want to do something else, like you want to append to the file, you open in A mode. The thing with the append mode is when the file doesn't exist, it creates it, and if it exists, it's going to open it and it's going to append to it. There are other modes that we have that we use. If we do X mode like this, is just for creating a file, and you get an error if that file already exists. If you have W mode like this, you are opening the file to write to the file. So your course resource holds a list of different file modes that we have. You can go through them and try them out. But let's look at the read mode. So I'll save this in a variable. Let's call this chapter1. So I'll say chapter1 is equal to open this. So we've opened the file. When the file is opened, a file object is created. That object has access to different methods. One is the read method like this. We use the read method to be able to read content of the file. So we can say file content is equal to, and we want to say the variable chapter1.read. And so this is going to read the content of the file into a variable called file content, and then we can print the file content. And at the end of it all, you must close the file. So we'll now write chapter1.close. Now this is in its basic form. We open the file with the open method, or with the open function. It returns a file object that has access to the read method. We use the read method to read the content of a file, and we use the close method to close that file. Let's say this is a basic way of opening and closing a file. In next lesson, we're going to see how we can do this more effectively, but for now, let's run this and see how it works. So we've read the content of the file. Week 1 introduction, week 2 learn the core programming concept, which is the same thing we have in this file. We open this in read mode, and assuming we don't have the mode specified here, it will still read the content because read is the default mode. But let's say we want to create a new file and we want to write to the new file. We open this in the write mode. Let's say we create a new file called chapter2, and we'll do this in the create mode, which is X. We can use the write mode and the A mode. We're going to look at that shortly, but let's look at what the X mode is going to do when we have the file in existence. Let's use chapter1 that is already in existence, and let's see what it does. And so we do this, and when I try to run this, it should give me an error because the file already exists. So the X mode is not going to create a new file when the file exists. If we use the append mode, it's going to append content to that file. So let's read the content, and let's say we want to append to the content. So we use the write method. So let's do this and see, and then we'll go back to just creating and writing to the file, and then let's print again. So we open this in append mode, we write to it, and then we read the content, and then we close. Let's run this to see. so it's not readable. Read is not supported, and because we do this in append mode, we can open and write the file. We didn't open this in read mode. So when we close the file now, let's close it here, we can open the file again. So I'm showing you this long method for you to see, when we get to managing resources, a more effective way of doing this rather than doing this open and close. So we're going to open chapter 1.txt, and we want it in read mode, which is the default. So when we run this now, we have the new line appended at the end. Finally, we will look at best practices. If we come back to the file here to open the chapter 1, we see that that is appended to the end of the file, what we just wrote here. So this is when you use the A mode. Let's say we want to use the X mode to create. We'll create a new file called chapter 2, and we want to write to this new file. So let's write. I'm going to delete this. So this is chapter 2.txt. We want it to write to a new file, so it creates this file and writes to it and then closes it. So we just want these 2 lines written, and when we run this, we have a new file, chapter 2.txt, created here, and when we open the file, we'll see what it has written here. We can add a space by putting a \n to have a new line after every sentence that it has written. And when we try to run this again, we're going to get an error because it's trying to create a file that already exists. And so we can delete this file, or we can just change the name to chapter 3, and then we run this and it creates a new file, chapter 3, and now we see all the content in a new line like that. So when we have this, we can't read the file because we open in this mode. Let's say we want to open this in W mode. What this mode will do is to overwrite the content of that file. So we have welcome to Python, right? So let's change this to welcome to PHP, and we'll now say the current content of chapter 3 is welcome to Python. Finally, we will look at best practices. When we run this file, we expect that it overwrites this content, and so when I run and I come back to the chapter 3, the content has been overwritten. So when we open in W mode, that is what it does. So refer to your course resource to see the different modes that we have, try them out, see what works, what doesn't work, and know exactly what to do. Now, if we want to delete the file, the module we need is the OS module. And now in last lesson, we look at modules, and here we're going to import an inbuilt module called OS. Once you have OS imported like this, you now have access to the different functions and methods that the OS module has. We want to delete, we want to remove the file chapter 2.txt and chapter 3.txt. But one thing we need to do when we create this, especially when we're creating this now professionally or for production, we want to always check if that file exists so that we don't run into errors, and we want to handle errors. And so I'll just use if os.path. So there is a path function. So we'll do if os.path.exist. So this is the method we want to use. If os.path.exist. So now using the OS module, it gives us access to these different methods that it has, and this just checks the path that we specified for the file name. And if that file exists, we want to do something, we want to delete, right? So we'll say os.remove. But if it doesn't exist, we want to use else. We want to say the file path does not exist, something like this. So now when we run this, it will remove the chapter 2 file. We see it's gone. When we try it again, it's deleted, so it will say the file does not exist because we have deleted it. We can do the same thing to remove chapter 3, and then we run, and chapter 3 is out. So this is how we use that OS module to delete a file. So you just use the remove method from the OS module, and you check first if the path exists before you try to delete the file, or if the file exists. Now the same thing you do if you want to delete a folder, now not a file. That folder has to be empty first, so you have to delete all the files from the folder, and then you use a different method to delete the folder. And the method that we use now, so instead we'll say os.remove, we'll do os.rmdir. So this is the function we use to remove a directory. Alright, so assuming this was a folder, we use this. The folder has to be empty. Now we saw that we have been opening our files and then we close the files. See, if we want to manage our resources, we don't want to risk losing data and we don't want to risk reaching the limits of the resources. We don't want to have memory leaks. There is something called Context Manager that we are going to look at in the next lesson to properly handle the opening and closing of our files. Thank you, and see you in the next lesson.